The insurance check arrived the day after my husband's funeral. $500,000 made out to Marcus, not me. As I stared at my brother-in-law's name where mine should have been, something cold settled in my stomach. David would never have changed his beneficiary without telling me, which meant someone else had. My name is Sarah Martinez. 3 months ago, at 34 years old, I buried my husband, David, after a tragic car accident when his brakes failed on mountain roads. I should have been focused solely on my grief, on how to rebuild my life without my best friend. Instead, I found myself staring at insurance documents that made no sense, with signatures that looked almost, but not quite, like my husband's. If you've ever had that moment where the floor seems to drop out from under you because something is fundamentally wrong in your world, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you know what it's like to discover betrayal hiding beneath the surface of what you thought was love. For 7 years, I had been married to David Rodriguez, a kind-hearted construction project manager who could fix anything broken around our house, but cried openly during sad movies. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom home in the suburbs of Phoenix that we had painted ourselves over a long weekend, arguing playfully about color choices and flicking paint at each other when discussions reached a stalemate. The peach-colored splotch on our kitchen ceiling was a permanent reminder of David's terrible aim. I would look up at it every morning while making coffee, smiling at the memory. Before meeting David, I'd worked as an ICU nurse for nearly a decade, pulling double shifts and building a reputation for staying calm during the worst emergencies. When David's mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 3 years ago, we made the difficult decision that I would leave nursing to care for her full-time. Maria had no one else. David's father had passed away years ago, and his only brother, Marcus, traveled constantly for his investment consulting business. At least, that's what Marcus always claimed. "You're the only one I trust with Mom," David had told me, his voice cracking as he held my hands in our kitchen. "But I won't ask you to give up your career if you don't want to." I had loved nursing, but I loved David more, and Maria had always treated me like a daughter, not an in-law. The decision was difficult but clear. "Family comes first," I had said, squeezing his hands back. "We will make it work on your salary for now." For 3 years, I cooked Maria's meals, administered her medications, bathed her, and held her hand during moments of clarity and confusion alike. David worked longer hours to compensate for my lost income, often coming home exhausted but never complaining. We were partners in everything, including this labor of love. Marcus visited occasionally, usually showing up in designer clothes and a new luxury car, always ready with stories about his latest business deals or exotic travels. He'd kiss his mother's cheek, hand her expensive gifts she couldn't remember receiving 10 minutes later, and then disappear for months. David never criticized his brother openly, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. "Marcus has always been like this," David explained once after his brother had canceled another promised visit. "When we were kids, he'd talk big about the amazing birthday presents he was getting me, then show up with some last-minute thing and a great excuse. Mom and Dad always believed him." Maria passed away peacefully in her sleep 6 months ago. After the funeral, Marcus hugged me tightly. "You're an angel, Sarah," he'd whispered. "Few women would do what you did for someone else's mother." I'd felt uncomfortable with his praise. Maria wasn't someone else's mother to me, she was family. 2 months later, David died. The police report said he was driving down Camelback Mountain when his brake lines failed. His car went through a guardrail and rolled 3 times before coming to rest at the bottom of a steep embankment. He died instantly, they assured me, as if that somehow made it better. The shock of losing David so suddenly, so violently, left me barely functioning. I moved through the funeral arrangements like a robot, nodding at appropriate moments and signing whatever papers were placed in front of me. Our house, once filled with David's loud laugh and impromptu dance parties in the kitchen, became unbearably quiet. The day after the funeral, Marcus showed up at my door with red-rimmed eyes and a manila folder tucked under his arm. He had been a constant presence since David's accident, handling calls I couldn't bear to take and sitting with me through the awful silence of the evenings. "Sarah, I know this is hard," he said, his voice cracking in the right places. "But we need to handle David's affairs quickly. Let me take care of the insurance paperwork. You shouldn't have to deal with this mess right now." I was grateful. My hands shook so badly I could barely sign my own name, let alone navigate complicated insurance forms. I knew David had a life insurance policy through his work. We discussed it when we first got married, both agreeing that I would be the sole beneficiary. It wasn't something we talked about regularly, but it was settled. "Thank you," I whispered, hugging him. "David always said you were the responsible one." Marcus smiled. "Little brothers, they always look up to us, don't they? Even when we don't deserve it." For 3 months, Marcus handled everything. He'd text me updates that always said essentially the same thing: the insurance company needs more documentation. "They're being difficult, but I'm handling it. These things take time, Sarah, don't worry." I believed him because I needed to believe someone cared about David's memory as much as I did. And because grief had hollowed me out, leaving little energy for questions. The discovery came by accident, the way most life-changing moments do. I was finally ready to clean out David's home office, a task I'd been avoiding. Touching his things, the coffee mug with "World's Okayest Husband" printed on it, the framed photo of us hiking the Grand Canyon, and the sticky notes with his messy handwriting, felt like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. I found it when I was emptying his filing cabinet, a folder wedged behind the others, as if hastily shoved there. Inside was a life insurance policy I'd never seen before, a $500,000 policy through his employer that was separate from the one I knew about. My heart stopped when I saw the beneficiary line: Marcus Rodriguez, sole beneficiary. David had always told me I was his only beneficiary on everything. We had updated all our documents when we got married. I knew every policy, every account, every investment, or so I thought. The policy date showed it was opened 2 years ago, but the beneficiary change form was dated 4 months before David died. 4 months ago, David had been in the hospital with pneumonia, barely conscious for a week, pumped full of morphine and steroids. I stared at David's signature on that form. It looked like his handwriting, but something felt wrong. The D in David slanted differently than usual. The loops in his last name were too tight, too perfect. After 15 years of watching him sign birthday cards and mortgage papers, I knew his signature like I knew his face. This wasn't right. With trembling hands, I dug deeper into the filing cabinet. There were other documents I'd never seen: credit card statements for accounts I didn't know existed, bank statements from a small regional bank we'd never used, and medical bills that David had never mentioned. All with his signature, but all with that same slightly off quality. That night, I sat in my car outside Marcus's house for 2 hours, staring at his living room window. Part of me wanted to march up to his door and scream at him, demanding answers about the insurance policy. Another part whispered that maybe I was wrong, that grief was making me paranoid. I thought about David's last words to me in the hospital after his bout with pneumonia: "Take care of each other, okay? Marcus needs family, too." Had David meant to change the beneficiary? Had he wanted to provide for his brother somehow? But then I remembered Marcus's face at the funeral, how he'd hugged me so tightly when I sobbed, how he'd whispered, "Don't worry about money, Sarah. David would want you taken care of." How he'd offered to handle the insurance claim before I even asked. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I went home and laid out all the documents I'd found, studying each signature carefully. The more I looked, the more certain I became that they weren't David's. Not exactly. They were close enough to pass a casual inspection, but wrong in subtle ways that only someone who truly knew him would notice. The next morning, I called David's company's HR department. "I'm calling about my husband's life insurance policy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "David Rodriguez. He passed away 3 months ago." "Oh, Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm so sorry for your loss," the woman said, her voice softening. "Yes, we have the claim in process. Mr. Rodriguez's brother has submitted all the paperwork." "Can you tell me who is listed as the beneficiary?" I asked, holding my breath. "Let me check. Yes, the beneficiary is listed as Marcus Rodriguez. The change was made about 4 months ago. We have the signed form on file." My stomach twisted. Is there any way I could get a copy of that form? "Of course, we can email it to you. What address should we use?" I gave her my email, thanked her, and hung up. 20 minutes later, I was staring at the form on my computer screen. The signature looked like the others I'd found, close to David's, but wrong in those same subtle ways. The doubt ate at me for weeks. I'd stare at Marcus's texts, looking for clues. I'd replay every conversation, every concerned phone call. Was I betraying David's memory by suspecting his brother, or was I betraying David by letting Marcus steal from us both? I needed proof, not suspicion. I contacted a handwriting expert and paid her $800, which I could barely afford, to analyze the signatures. While waiting for her results, I did something I had never done before. I started following Marcus. He lived in an upscale apartment downtown that I knew he could never afford on the modest consulting income he claimed to have. When I parked outside his building, I often saw him leaving in his new Mercedes, dressed in expensive suits, looking nothing like a man grieving for his brother. One evening, I followed him to a casino outside of town. I watched from a distance as he exchanged thick stacks of cash for chips, gambling recklessly at high-stakes tables. 3 hours later, he left looking grim, his shoulders hunched in defeat. The handwriting expert confirmed my worst fears the next day. The signature was forged. "Without question," she said, pointing out the specific inconsistencies I'd noticed and several more I hadn't. She offered to provide a formal report that would stand up in court. But when I dug deeper into Marcus's finances, using some of David's old passwords, I found something that made my blood run cold. Marcus hadn't forged David's signature once. He'd been doing it for years. There were credit card applications in David's name, a personal loan David never knew about, and medical bills that Marcus had been paying with money from accounts he had secretly opened using David's information. Marcus wasn't greedy, he was desperate. According to emails I found, he owed money to some very dangerous people, and David's death wasn't convenient timing. The real twist came when I found Marcus's search history on an old laptop he'd borrowed from David months before the accident. Searches for "How long does morphine stay in system?", "Forging signatures tutorial", and "Car brake line failure symptoms" painted a picture that made me physically sick. Marcus hadn't stolen from David. The accident that killed my husband might not have been an accident at all. I sat alone in our bedroom that night, surrounded by printed emails and financial statements, the evidence of Marcus's betrayal laid out like a grotesque puzzle. The grief I had been drowning in for months crystallized into something harder, something that burned cold in my chest. "I need to go to the police," I whispered to David's photo on my nightstand. His smile looked different to me now, sadder, like he'd known somehow that his own brother would betray him in the worst possible way. But then I remembered how close the brothers had once been, before money and jealousy had twisted Marcus. I remembered David's stories about their childhood, how Marcus had taught him to ride a bike, had defended him from neighborhood bullies, and had been his hero before something inside him changed. And I remembered how our justice system worked. Without direct evidence connecting Marcus to David's brake lines, would the police take this seriously? Would they see the pattern I saw, or would they dismiss it as the paranoid ravings of a grieving widow? I didn't go to the police first, I went to Marcus. I set up a meeting at the coffee shop where David and I had our first date, somewhere public where Marcus would feel safe to talk. I brought copies of everything: the forged signature analysis, the financial records, the search history, all of it in a neat little folder like the one he'd brought to my door after the funeral. Marcus was 15 minutes late, sauntering in, wearing designer sunglasses and checking his watch ostentatiously. His face softened into practiced sympathy when he saw me. "Sarah, sorry I'm late. How are you holding up?" He leaned in to kiss my cheek, but I turned away slightly. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. "We need to talk." He raised an eyebrow but slid into the chair across from me. "You sound serious. Is everything okay?" "I know what you did," I said, sliding the folder across the table. Marcus went white as he flipped through the pages, his carefully constructed facade crumbling with each document he saw. His hands began to shake. "Sarah, I can explain," he started, his voice higher than usual. "Can you explain David's brake lines? Because that is going to be interesting when the insurance investigators review the accident report." His eyes darted around the coffee shop, checking if anyone was listening. "You don't understand. I was drowning. You needed my husband dead." I finished for him, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "No," he lowered his voice after several people turned to look at us. "No, it wasn't like that. The money problems, yes. The forgery, yes. But David's accident, that was terrible timing. You have to believe me." Like I believed you were handling the insurance claim for me. Like David believed you when you said you were too busy to help with your mother's care. My voice didn't waver. "I don't have to believe anything you say ever again." Marcus leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. "Sarah, please, I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I loved my brother, I'd never hurt him. Tell me what you want, money? I'll give you the insurance payout, all of it." I almost laughed. "It's not your money to give, Marcus. It was never meant for you." "Then what do you want?" His voice cracked, and for a moment I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "I want my husband back," I said, "but since you can't give me that, I'll settle for justice." The beauty of my revenge was its simplicity. I'd already contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, the insurance fraud investigators, and given them copies of everything. I'd also sent copies to David's employer's security department and the police detective who'd handled the accident case. But I wanted Marcus to know it was me who brought down his world, like he'd brought down mine. "What have you done?" he whispered, looking physically ill. "The FBI and police are waiting outside," I said, nodding toward the window where two plainclothes officers stood watching us. "They've been building a case for weeks. Your financial records, your search history, the forged documents, they have it all." Marcus lunged for the door, but didn't make it 3 steps before the officers intercepted him. I watched calmly as they read him his rights, his face contorting with rage and fear as he looked back at me one last time before they led him away. "He would have forgiven you," I called after him. "David would have forgiven you anything. That's why you were able to betray him so easily." The investigation that followed uncovered even more than I had found on my own. Marcus hadn't stolen David's identity. He'd done the same to 3 other people. He'd accumulated gambling debts to dangerous people who had threatened his life. He was desperate and cornered. The brake line evidence was circumstantial, but damning. 2 days before David's accident, Marcus had searched online for how to make brake failure look like an accident. He'd visited an auto parts store near David's workplace. His cell phone placed him near our house the night before the crash, though he'd claimed to be out of town. 6 months after my coffee shop confrontation, I sat in a federal courtroom and watched Marcus get sentenced to 15 years for insurance fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy. The murder charges couldn't be proven, but the financial crimes were enough to put him away for a long time. The insurance company paid out David's legitimate policies to me, the original policy I'd known about, plus the one Marcus had tried to steal. They added damages for the fraud attempt, bringing the total to nearly $1 million. I didn't want to touch the money at first. It felt tainted, connected to David's death in ways that made my skin crawl. But eventually, I found a purpose for it that felt right. I used half to start the David Rodriguez Foundation for Financial Fraud Victims, an organization that helps people navigate the complex legal system when they've been victimized by identity theft or insurance scams. The foundation offers free legal advice, connects victims with resources, and lobbies for stronger protections against financial crimes. With the remaining money, I went back to school to become a forensic accountant, specializing in detecting fraud. The skills I'd developed investigating Marcus's crimes weren't ones I'd ever expected to need, but they gave me a unique perspective that professors said they rarely saw in students. 2 years after David's death, I sat in my new home office surrounded by textbooks and case studies. On my wall hung my nursing license next to my new accounting certification, 2 different ways of healing that defined different chapters of my life. On my desk sat David's photo, his smile no longer seeming sad to me, but proud. Next to it was a small wooden box containing the peach-colored paint chip I'd removed from our old kitchen's ceiling before selling the house. Some memories are too precious to leave behind. Marcus destroyed my life, but he also gave me a purpose. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's turning their evil into something good, something that ensures they can never hurt anyone else the way they hurt you. Every night before bed, I still talk to David. I tell him about the foundation, about the 3 families we helped last month recover stolen identities, about the legislation we're supporting in Congress. I like to think he hears me, that he knows his death wasn't meaningless. Marcus was right about one thing: David would have forgiven him. Forgiveness came to my husband. But David also believed in justice, in making things right when they went wrong. That's the part Marcus never understood, the part I carry forward now. Justice served cold is still justice served. And sometimes, the person you trusted the most is the one you should have questioned from the beginning. Have you ever discovered someone close to you wasn't who they pretended to be? How did you handle that betrayal? Share your experience in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength after betrayal and the power of uncovering hidden truths.